little girl whispered. "That's the man who killed my real daddy." And when her tiny finger pointed at their own lawyer, the courtroom froze. But what came next revealed a secret darker than anyone imagined. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the Millbrook County Courthouse, casting long shadows across the worn wooden benches. John Carter's calloused hand held his daughter Emily's tiny fingers, trying to hide the trembling that betrayed his fear. The courtroom's musty air felt thick with tension as he sat on the defendant's side, his threadbare suit jacket a stark contrast to the crisp attire of his in-laws across the aisle. Emily swung her feet, her patent leather shoes barely reaching halfway to the floor. Her dark curls were neatly tied back with a ribbon John had fumbled with that morning, doing his best to make her presentable. The judge's bench loomed before them like a mountain, and John's heart pounded against his ribs. Grace's parents sat ramrod straight on the plaintiff's side, their expensive clothes and stern expressions making John feel even smaller. Mrs. Henderson dabbed at her eyes with an embroidered handkerchief, while Mr. Henderson's jaw clenched rhythmically, his steel-gray eyes fixed on John with clear disapproval. "All rise," the bailiff called out, his voice echoing through the chamber. "The Honorable Judge Martha Wilson presiding." John stood, gently pulling Emily up beside him. The judge, a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair and reading glasses perched on her nose, took her seat and surveyed the courtroom. "Please be seated," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. "We're here today in the matter of Henderson versus Carter, regarding the custody of minor child Emily Grace Carter." John's lawyer, Mr. Samuel Daniels, sat beside them in a perfectly pressed suit, his leather briefcase open on the table. He projected confidence, but John could see the slight sheen of sweat on his forehead. The Hendersons' lawyer spoke first, his words cutting through John like knives. "Your Honor, my clients seek full custody of their granddaughter, Emily Carter. Mr. Carter's income as a mechanic is barely sufficient to cover basic necessities. The child lacks proper medical insurance, lives in a cramped apartment, and deserves the stable environment that her grandparents can provide." John's fingers tightened around Emily's hand. The apartment might be small, but it was filled with love. Every night, he read to her before bed, no matter how tired he was from work. They had their Saturday morning pancake ritual, and he never missed her school events, even if it meant losing pay. Judge Wilson turned her attention to their table. "Mr. Daniels, you may present your case." Daniels stood, straightening his tie. "Your Honor, John Carter is a devoted father who—" "That's the man who killed my real daddy." Emily's whisper cut through the courtroom like a thunderclap. Her small finger pointed directly at Mr. Daniels, her blue eyes wide and serious. The words seemed to hover in the air, impossible to take back. The courtroom erupted in gasps and murmurs. John felt the blood drain from his face as he stared down at his daughter, then at his lawyer. Daniels stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, the color draining from his face. "Order!" Judge Wilson's gavel cracked against the wooden block. "Order in the court!" The Hendersons leaned forward, their expressions a mixture of shock and vindication. Their lawyer was already scribbling furiously on his legal pad. John's mind raced. Emily had never met Daniels before today. How could she possibly think he had anything to do with her father's death? The accident had happened when she was only 4, a tragic car crash that had taken Grace from them both. "Emily, honey," John whispered, his voice shaking. "What are you talking about?" But Emily's gaze remained fixed on Daniels, her small face set with the absolute certainty that only a child could possess. "I heard Mommy say it," she said, her voice carrying in the hushed courtroom. "She was crying and said he didn't help when Daddy needed him." Daniels gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. "Your Honor, I can explain." The judge held up her hand, silencing him. Her keen eyes moved from Emily to Daniels, then to John, who felt as though the floor was crumbling beneath his feet. Everything he'd feared, losing Emily, being judged unfit, seemed to pale in comparison to this moment. The Hendersons' lawyer stood. "Your Honor, given this shocking revelation, we move For an immediate, "Counsel will approach the bench," Judge Wilson commanded, her voice sharp. The lawyers moved forward while John sat paralyzed, his arm now wrapped protectively around Emily's shoulders. Emily leaned against him, her small body trembling slightly. "I'm sorry, Daddy," she whispered. "Was I not supposed to say that?" John couldn't find words to answer. He watched as Daniels and the opposing counsel engaged in an intense discussion with the judge, their voices too low to hear. The Hendersons whispered urgently to each other, shooting glances in their direction. The courtroom buzzed with whispered conversations. John could feel the weight of curious stares from the gallery behind them. Emily buried her face in his side, suddenly aware of the chaos she had created. Judge Wilson's gavel cracked again. "In light of these unexpected developments, this court will take a 30-minute recess." Her eyes swept the room. "Mr. Daniels, I expect a full explanation when we reconvene. Bailiff, please clear the courtroom." The sharp rap of the gavel made Emily jump. John stood on shaky legs, lifting Emily into his arms. She wrapped her arms around his neck, holding tight, as she always did when she was frightened. Her words echoed in his head as he carried her toward the courtroom doors, feeling the eyes of everyone following them. "Daddy?" Emily's voice quivered against his ear. "Are you mad at me?" John held her closer, his heart breaking at the fear in her voice. "No, sweetheart," he managed to say, though his throat felt tight. "I'm not mad. We need to talk about what you said." As they pushed through the heavy wooden doors into the courthouse hallway, John's mind spun with questions. What had Grace told Emily about Daniels? What secrets lay buried in his wife's past? And how could he protect his daughter when he didn't even understand what they were facing? The courthouse steps felt like mountains beneath John Carter's feet as he carried Emily outside, away from the chaos her innocent words had created. The autumn breeze rustled through the maple trees lining the street, scattering red and gold leaves across the cracked concrete. John's mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Finding a quiet spot near an old wooden bench, John gently set Emily down and knelt before her. Her navy blue dress, the one he'd saved 3 weeks to buy, fluttered in the wind. He took her small hands in his, noting how they were trembling just like his own. "Sweetheart," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper, "can you tell Daddy why you said those words about Mr. Daniels?" Emily's blue eyes, so much like her mother's, met his. She twisted the hem of her dress with nervous fingers. "I heard Mommy talking about him before she went to heaven." John's heart clenched. "What did Mommy say, baby?" "It was nighttime," Emily said, her voice small but clear. "I was supposed to be sleeping, but I heard Mommy crying in the kitchen. She was talking on the phone about Mr. Daniels and how." She scrunched up her face, trying to remember. "How he was there when my real daddy died." John felt as if someone had punched him in the stomach. He'd married Grace when Emily was just a baby, after her biological father's fatal car accident. Emily had always known he wasn't her real daddy, but they'd never discussed the details of her father's death. "Emily, honey, are you sure that's what you heard?" She nodded solemnly. "Mommy was really upset. She said something about Mr. Daniels being responsible." Emily's lower lip trembled. "Did I say something wrong, Daddy?" Before John could answer, footsteps approached on the concrete. He turned to see Samuel Daniels standing there, his normally composed face etched with distress. His tie was loosened, and his briefcase hung limply from his hand. "John," Daniels said, his voice strained. "We need to talk." John instinctively pulled Emily closer. "I think we do. I had nothing to do with Thomas Mitchell's death," Daniels said firmly, running a hand through his graying hair. "Yes, I knew him. We were friends once, before." He trailed off, glancing at Emily. "Before what?" John's voice was hard. "Before we had a falling out over a case at our old firm." Daniels took a step closer, then seemed to think better of it when he saw John tense. The accident that killed him was just that, an accident. A drunk driver ran a red light. I was nowhere near there. John looked down at Emily, who was watching the exchange with wide eyes. His daughter wasn't a liar, she'd never been one, but she was 6. And memories could be tricky things, especially memories from years ago. Then why would Grace say you were responsible? Daniel's shoulders sagged. Because in a way, she wasn't wrong. I failed Thomas when he needed me most. But I never, his voice cracked slightly, I never caused his death. I've spent years trying to make up for my mistakes, which is why I took your case pro bono. I owe it to Thomas's daughter. Emily tugged on John's sleeve. Daddy, I'm scared, she whispered. It's okay, Princess, John assured her, though his own mind was churning with doubts. He stood, lifting Emily into his arms. She buried her face in his neck, her small body tense. John, please, Daniel said, taking a step forward. Let me explain everything. Not now, John said firmly. I need to get my daughter home. The drive home was quiet, except for the rattling of their old pickup truck's engine. John kept glancing in the rearview mirror at Emily, who sat silently in her booster seat, watching the world pass by outside her window. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across their faces as they pulled up to their small house on Cedar Street. The paint was peeling, and the front steps creaked, but it was home. John carried Emily inside, past the wall of photos showing their little family, him, Grace, and Emily, at the park, at Christmas, at Emily's first day of kindergarten. Grace's absence in recent photos felt like an open wound that refused to heal. That evening, after a simple dinner of macaroni and cheese, John helped Emily get ready for bed. He tucked her into her narrow bed, surrounded by her stuffed animals and the butterfly nightlight Grace had bought her last Christmas. Daddy? Emily's voice was small in the dim room. Yes, sweetheart? Are you mad at me? John's heart broke a little. He sat on the edge of her bed and stroked her hair. No, baby. I could never be mad at you for telling the truth about what you heard. Is Mr. Daniels a bad man? John hesitated, choosing his words carefully. I don't know everything about Mr. Daniels yet, but I promise you that I'm going to find out the truth. That's my job as your daddy, to protect you and make sure you're safe. Emily reached up and touched his cheek with her small hand. I love you, Daddy. I love you too, Princess. More than all the stars in the sky. He kissed her forehead and pulled her butterfly quilt up to her chin. Kneeling beside her bed, John closed his eyes and whispered the prayer they said every night, the one Grace had taught them. Dear God, please watch over us as we sleep. Give us strength for tomorrow, and help us to always know right from wrong. Amen. Emily's eyes were already drooping as he turned off her bedside lamp. John stood in her doorway for a moment, watching her peaceful face in the soft glow of the butterfly nightlight. The weight of the day's events pressed down on his shoulders, along with the promise he'd just made to his daughter. Morning sunlight filtered weakly through the faded curtains of John Carter's small kitchen, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. He stood at the counter, carefully spreading peanut butter on the last 2 slices of bread from yesterday's discount loaf. The knife scraped against the bread, and John winced, knowing how Emily hated when the bread tore. But they had to make do. Almost ready, sweetheart? He called out, his voice carrying down the narrow hallway to Emily's room. Coming, Daddy. Her cheerful reply made his heart ache. She deserved so much better than this. John packed the simple sandwich into Emily's lunchbox, adding an apple he'd polished until it shone in a small bag of off-brand cookies. The box had seen better days, its plastic surface scratched and faded, but Emily had decorated it with stickers of butterflies and hearts. He traced one of the butterfly stickers with his finger, remembering how proud she'd been of her artwork. Emily bounced into the kitchen, her backpack already on, brown hair pulled into slightly uneven pigtails she'd done herself. Did you remember to cut the crusts off? Sure did, Princess. He hadn't, but he quickly grabbed the knife and trimmed them while she watched. Every slice of bread counted these days, but her smile was worth the waste. The walk to school took them through the heart of their small town. Usually, John enjoyed these morning walks with Emily's small hand in his, listening to her chatter about everything and nothing. But today was different. The whispers started as soon as they passed Mrs. Henderson's flower shop. That's them, he heard someone murmur. The ones from yesterday's hearing. Emily squeezed his hand tighter, and John forced himself to walk tall, even as his cheeks burned. More whispers followed them down Main Street. past the diner where he'd once taken extra shifts before the owner had to cut back hours. "Poor thing," an elderly woman said just loud enough to hear. "Living in that run-down house with no mother." John quickened their pace, trying to shield Emily from the gossip. But she was too perceptive for her age. "Why are they talking about us, Daddy?" "Some people just don't have anything better to do, sweetheart." He managed to keep his voice steady. "Remember what Mommy used to say about gossip? That it hurts more than helps," Emily recited solemnly. At the school gates, John knelt down to hug her goodbye. Her arms around his neck felt like the only thing holding him together. "Have a good day, Princess. I'll pick you up right here at 3. Promise? Cross my heart." He watched until she disappeared into the brick building, then headed to Wilson's auto shop, where he'd been picking up part-time work. The familiar smell of oil and metal greeted him as he entered the garage, but even here, he couldn't escape yesterday's events. Mike Wilson, his boss, was waiting by the time clock. "John, got a minute?" They stepped into Mike's cramped office, where invoices competed for space with old car magazines and coffee-stained mugs. Mike settled into his creaking desk chair, his weathered face serious. "Look, John, you're one of my best mechanics, but I heard about yesterday's hearing." Mike cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Word travels fast in this town. Those grandparents of Emily's, they've got some pull with Judge Harrison." John's stomach clenched. "Mike, and now, with this business about your lawyer?" Mike shook his head. "I'm not saying I believe any of it, but it doesn't look good. Maybe if you had full-time work, you know I'd take more hours in a heartbeat. Times are tight everywhere." Mike's eyes were sympathetic but firm. "I can keep you on part-time, but that's all I can offer right now. And John, those grandparents? They've got the kind of money that usually wins these things." The rest of the day passed in a blur of oil changes and tire rotations. John threw himself into the work, grateful for the mindless tasks that kept his hands busy and his thoughts at bay. But Mike's words echoed in his head with every turn of his wrench. At 3 o'clock sharp, John waited outside the school. His work clothes changed, but the smell of motor oil still clinging to him. Emily came running out, her backpack bouncing, and for a moment everything felt right in the world. "Daddy, I got a gold star in reading today. That's my girl." He swept her up in a hug, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo, the fancy kind her grandparents always sent in care packages. They walked home together, Emily skipping every few steps, telling him about her day. The afternoon sun was warm on their backs, and John tried to focus on this moment, on his daughter's happiness rather than the weight of their troubles. But reality waited on their front porch in the form of Samuel Daniels, looking pristine in his expensive suit despite sitting on their weathered steps. He stood as they approached, his face grave but determined. Emily stopped skipping and pressed closer to John's side. "Mr. Carter," Daniels said, straightening his tie, "we need to talk." John Carter stood in his cramped living room, arms crossed, watching Mr. Daniels take a hesitant seat on their weathered couch. The springs creaked under the lawyer's weight, and dust motes danced in the afternoon light streaming through the window's threadbare curtains. Emily was upstairs in her room. John had made sure of that before letting Daniels inside. "I need to explain about Emily's father," Daniels said, his polished appearance at odds with the room's worn furniture and peeling wallpaper. He loosened his tie, looking more human than he had in the courthouse. "Marcus Thompson and I, we weren't just business partners. We were friends since college." John's jaw tightened. He remained standing, his mechanic's coveralls still spotted with oil from work. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because what Emily said in court." Daniels paused, running a hand through his graying hair. "She's not entirely wrong. I didn't kill Marcus, not directly, but I might as well have, for all the good I did him when it mattered." The ceiling creaked above them, Emily walking in her room. John glanced up, then back at Daniels. "What do you mean?" "We started a law firm together, Marcus and I, fresh out of school, full of dreams about changing the world." Daniels gave a bitter laugh. "Then we landed our first major client, Preston Manufacturing. Big company, bigger money, but Marcus noticed something wasn't right in their hiring practices." John shifted his weight, uncrossing his arms. Despite himself, he found a kitchen chair and sat down. Go on. Marcus discovered they were systematically firing minority workers, covering it up with false performance reviews. He wanted to report it, to stand up against it. Daniel's voice grew quiet. I told him to let it go. The account was worth millions to our firm. But Marcus, he was a better man than me. He threatened to expose everything. Outside, a dog barked, and a car drove past. The living room felt smaller somehow, stuffed with the weight of Daniel's words. They fired him instead, blacklisted him from every major law firm in the state. And Daniel's hands clenched in his lap. I stood by and watched, kept my mouth shut, kept my position, kept my comfortable life. John leaned forward. And then, 3 months later, Marcus died in that car accident. They said the brakes failed. Just one of those things. Daniels looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. I've spent every day since wondering if I could have prevented it. If I'd stood with him, backed him up, maybe he wouldn't have been driving that old car that night. Maybe he would have still had his job, his nice car with the good brakes. The silence stretched between them. John could hear Emily humming upstairs, some tune from her favorite cartoon. I've tried to make up for it, Daniels continued. I've taken on discrimination cases pro bono. Started a foundation in Marcus's name, but nothing erases the fact that when my friend needed me most, I chose comfort over courage. John stood up, pacing the small space. Why are you my lawyer then? Why take our case? Because when I heard Emily's grandparents were trying to take her away, claiming you couldn't provide for her. Daniel straightened his shoulders. I saw another injustice. Another chance to finally do the right thing. You're a good father, John. You work 3 jobs to keep her fed. You read to her every night, no matter how tired you are. I've done my research. That's what scares me, John said, his voice rough. You've been watching us, carrying all these secrets about Emily's real father. I'm not here to replace anyone, Daniel said quickly. I'm here to help make things right. To make sure Emily stays with the father who's been there for her every day. You. John walked to the window, looking out at the patchy lawn they couldn't afford to water properly. Emily's mother. She never told me about any of this. Grace was trying to protect everyone, Daniel said softly. She married Marcus young, lost him too soon. Then she found you, someone who could love both her and Emily with an open heart. A floorboard creaked, and John turned to see Emily peering around the corner of the stairs. Her small face was serious, her teddy bear clutched tight against her chest. For a moment, John saw Marcus in her features, the same determination he must have had when standing up against injustice. Emily, honey, go back upstairs, John said gently. She disappeared without a word, and John turned back to Daniels. I think you should leave now. Daniel stood, straightening his suit jacket. John, please, let me help you keep Emily. Let me do this one thing right. I need time to think, John said, walking to the front door and opening it. The evening air carried the scent of Mrs. Peterson's roses from next door. Daniels paused in the doorway. The hearing continues tomorrow. Whatever you decide about me, please don't let it affect Emily's case. She deserves to stay with you. John closed the door without responding, but remained standing there, hand pressed against the worn wood. Through the thin walls, he could hear Daniel's expensive shoes clicking down the concrete path, could hear the lawyer's car start up and drive away. The truth sat heavy in his chest. Daniels might be the only person who could help them win against Emily's wealthy grandparents. But could he trust a man who had failed Emily's biological father so completely? He looked up the stairs where Emily had disappeared, thinking of all the questions he'd never thought to ask about Marcus Thompson, about the accident that had made Emily fatherless the first time. Maybe Daniels, for all his failures, held answers that both he and Emily needed. The old grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 9 as John tucked Emily into her small bed, pulling her worn princess blanket up to her chin. Her room was simple, just a bed, a scratched dresser from the thrift store, and a small desk where she did her homework. But John had painted the walls a cheerful yellow, and paper flowers Emily had made at school decorated every surface. "Daddy?" Emily's voice was small in the dim light of her bedside lamp. "Can I tell you something?" John sat on the edge of her bed, the mattress dipping under his weight. "Of course, sweetheart. You can tell me anything." Emily clutched her stuffed rabbit closer. "I remember something from before, when Mommy was still here." Her lower lip trembled. "One night, I got up to get water, and I heard Mommy crying in the kitchen." John's heart clenched. He reached out to stroke Emily's hair, the same shade of brown as her mother's had been. "What happened then?" "She was talking on the phone real quiet," Emily continued, her eyes growing distant with the memory. "She said, 'Daniels destroyed our lives. She was so sad, Daddy. Why would Mr. Daniels do that?'" John's hand stilled on Emily's hair. The words hit him like a physical blow. "Are you sure that's what she said, honey?" Emily nodded solemnly. "I remember, 'cause it scared me. I didn't know who Daniels was then, but Mommy sounded different than I ever heard her before." John leaned down and kissed Emily's forehead, trying to keep his voice steady. "Thank you for telling me, sweetheart. Try to get some sleep now, okay?" "Okay, Daddy." Emily yawned and snuggled deeper under her blanket. "Love you." "Love you too, Princess." John turned off the lamp but left the door cracked open just the way Emily liked it. His mind was racing as he walked down the hallway to the storage closet. There, on the highest shelf, sat a cardboard box he hadn't opened since Sarah's death 2 years ago. It held all of her personal papers, things he hadn't been able to face going through after losing her. He carried the box to the kitchen table, dust coating his fingers. Thunder rumbled in the distance as he lifted the lid, and the familiar scent of Sarah's lavender perfume drifted up from the contents. His hands shook as he began sorting through the papers. Old photos spilled across the table. Sarah with her first husband, both of them young and smiling. Wedding pictures, baby photos of Emily, birth certificate, insurance papers. And there, at the bottom of the box, a stack of leather-bound journals. John opened the most recent one, recognizing Sarah's neat handwriting. The pages were slightly wrinkled, as if tears had fallen on them while she wrote. "April 15th, he read quietly. "Found out today that Daniels knew the truth all along. He could have prevented everything. The firing, the depression, the accident. He chose to stay silent when Tom needed him most. His precious career meant more than doing what was right." Lightning flashed outside the kitchen window as John flipped through more pages. Words jumped out at him. Betrayal, cover-up, guilty conscience. Sarah's normally steady writing grew increasingly agitated in later entries. June 3rd. Daniels called today. Says he wants to make things right. Too late for that. Tom is gone, and no amount of money or apologies will bring him back. Emily will grow up never knowing her real father because of his cowardice. John's eyes burned as he read entry after entry. The storm outside grew stronger, rain now pelting against the windows. He found himself transported back in time through Sarah's words, feeling her pain and anger as if it were his own. September 12th. Sometimes I wonder if Daniels realizes what his silence cost us. Not just Tom's job, but his spirit. He was never the same after that. The accident might have taken his life, but Daniels and that company broke him first. Thunder crashed closer now, but John barely noticed. He was lost in Sarah's words, piecing together a story he'd never fully understood. His head grew heavy as exhaustion settled over him, but he couldn't stop reading. December 24th. Saw Daniels at the grocery store today. He tried to speak to me, but I walked away. Emily asked who he was. How do you explain to a child that this man's silence helped destroy her father? That his fancy suit and car were bought with the pieces of his conscience? The kitchen clock ticked past midnight. John's eyes grew heavier with each page, but Sarah's words kept pulling him deeper into the past. The storm raged outside, matching the turmoil in his heart as he uncovered more of the truth. Rain drummed steadily on the roof as John's head slowly lowered to rest on his arms. The journals scattered around him like fallen leaves. The last thing he saw before sleep claimed him was Sarah's final entry. "I pray someday the truth comes out, for Emily's sake, for all our sakes." The storm continued its assault on the little house, but John didn't hear it anymore. He slept at the kitchen table, surrounded by the ghosts of the past, while upstairs, Emily dreamed of a father she barely remembered and a mother she missed every day. Morning sunlight filtered through the threadbare curtains of John Carter's modest living room. The worn couch cushions still held the impression from where he'd fallen asleep, reading his late wife's journals. His neck ached from the awkward position, but his mind was too full of questions to notice the discomfort. A firm knock at the door made him jump. Emily peeked around the corner from the kitchen, her small hands clutching a half-eaten piece of toast. "Daddy? Is that him again?" John straightened his rumpled shirt and ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "Stay in the kitchen, sweetie." He opened the door to find Samuel Daniels standing there, looking immaculate in his tailored suit despite the early hour. "Mr. Carter," Daniels said, his voice softer than yesterday. "May I come in? I have something important to discuss." John glanced back at Emily, who was watching them with wide eyes. He stepped aside, allowing Daniels to enter. The lawyer's polished shoes looked out of place on their scuffed hardwood floor. "I've been up all night," Daniels said, setting his leather briefcase on the coffee table. "What I told you yesterday, about Emily's father, it's only part of the story." He pulled out a thick folder. "For the past 5 years, I've been gathering evidence against the company that wrongfully terminated him. I've been working pro bono cases, helping families affected by discrimination." John sank into his armchair, studying Daniels's face for any sign of deception. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I can help you keep Emily." Daniels spread several documents across the table. "Your in-laws may have money, but they're connected to the same corrupt corporate circles that destroyed Emily's father's life. I have evidence that could expose their involvement." Emily wandered into the room, drawn by their serious tones. She clutched her stuffed rabbit closer when Daniels looked at her, but didn't run away this time. "Hi, Emily," Daniels said gently. "I brought something for you." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small photo album. "These are pictures of your father, your first father, when we were young. Would you like to see them?" Emily looked to John for permission. When he nodded, she approached cautiously and took the album. Her small fingers traced the faces in the photographs. "That's him at our college graduation," Daniels explained, his voice thick with emotion. "He was the brightest student in our class, always standing up for what was right." John watched his daughter's face as she studied the images. "You've been carrying these all these years?" Daniels nodded. "As a reminder of my failure. When he needed me most, I chose career over conscience. I've spent every day since trying to make it right." John leaned forward, his voice low. "And now you want to help us? Let me be your lawyer, John. For real this time. No charge." Daniels pulled out more papers. "I've already started building your case. Your in-laws might have expensive attorneys, but they don't have the truth on their side." Emily looked up from the album. "Daddy, he looks sad when he talks about my other daddy." Her simple observation hit John hard. He'd seen that same sadness in Daniels's eyes yesterday. Not the calculated remorse of a guilty man, but the deep pain of someone carrying a heavy burden. "Okay," John said finally. "We'll work together. But no more secrets, Mr. Daniels. Everything on the table." "Call me Samuel," Daniels replied, relief visible on his face. "And I promise complete transparency from now on." He began explaining his strategy, pointing out specific documents that would strengthen their case. As they talked, Emily settled on the floor with the photo album, occasionally asking questions about the young men in the pictures. The morning light grew stronger, casting long shadows across the room. After an hour of discussion, Daniels gathered his papers. "I'll file these motions today. We'll need to meet again tomorrow to prepare your testimony." John walked him to the door, feeling cautiously hopeful for the first time in weeks. But as Daniels stepped onto the porch, something caught John's eye. A black sedan was parked across the street, its tinted windows reflecting the morning Sunday. "Samuel," John said quietly. "That car, how long has it been there?" Daniels turned slowly, his expression darkening. "I noticed it when I arrived. Thought it might have been coincidence, but—" "Daddy?" Emily called from inside. "What are you looking at?" John pulled her close as she joined them at the window. The car's engine started, and it pulled away smoothly, turning the corner with deliberate slowness. Something bigger is going on here, John muttered, holding Emily tighter. The morning air felt unusually crisp as John Carter walked Emily to school, his eyes constantly scanning the streets. Every dark-colored car made his heart skip a beat, though none matched the sleek black sedan from yesterday. Emily skipped along beside him, her backpack bouncing with each step, seemingly unaware of his tension. "Daddy, can I have my friend Sarah over after school?" Emily asked, her small hand warm in his. John forced a smile, trying to keep his voice light. "Not today, sweetheart. I have an important meeting to go to." "With Mr. Daniels?" Emily's steps slowed slightly. "Is he going to show you more pictures of my other daddy?" "Yes, with Mr. Daniels." John squeezed her hand gently. "How do you feel about that, honey?" Emily's face scrunched up in thought, a habit she'd inherited from her mother. "He looked really sad in his eyes when he talked about my other daddy, like you do sometimes when you look at Mommy's pictures." John's throat tightened. Even at 6, Emily could see straight through to people's hearts. They reached the school gates, where other children were streaming in with their parents. John knelt down to Emily's level, straightening her slightly crooked collar. "You have a good day at school, okay? Miss Wilson will walk you to the after-school program, and I'll pick you up at 5. He hugged her tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Promise you'll be careful, Daddy?" Emily whispered against his shoulder. Sometimes her perceptiveness scared him. "I promise, baby girl." He watched her join her classmates, her yellow dress bright against the morning shadows. The Bell and Spoon Diner sat just 2 blocks from the garage where John worked. He'd taken an early lunch break, his hands still slightly greasy despite scrubbing them thoroughly. The bell above the door chimed as he entered, and he spotted Daniels already seated in a corner booth, several manila folders spread before him. "John." Daniels stood to shake his hand. "Thank you for meeting me. Please, sit." The vinyl booth squeaked as John slid in. A waitress immediately appeared with coffee, suggesting Daniels had been there a while. "I ordered you coffee. Hope that's okay," Daniels said, pushing a steaming mug across the table. "Cream and sugar are there if you need them." John took the coffee black, wrapping his work-roughened hands around the warm ceramic. "You said you had something to show me?" Daniels nodded, pulling out a particular file. "These are documents from when I worked with Emily's father at Riverside Corporate Law." He spread out several papers, pointing to highlighted sections. "Look at these internal memos. The management was systematically discriminating against minority employees, burying them in dead-end positions or finding excuses to terminate them." John leaned forward, scanning the yellowed pages. "And Emily's father discovered this?" "More than discovered it." Daniels pulled out another document, this one clearly a formal complaint. He gathered evidence, built a case. He was planning to expose everything. His voice grew quieter. "That's when they came after him." "They?" John's coffee sat forgotten. "The senior partners, working with certain corporate clients." Daniel's hands trembled slightly as he revealed more papers. "They didn't just fire him. They blacklisted him, destroyed his reputation in the legal community." When he tried to fight back, Daniels swallowed hard. "That's when the accidents started happening." John's stomach clenched. "Accidents?" His car brake lines were cut. Twice. He received threatening phone calls. His home office was broken into. Daniel's voice was heavy with old guilt. "I knew what was happening. I saw it all. But I was young, ambitious, scared. I convinced myself it wasn't my fight." The waitress returned to take their orders, but John waved her away. His appetite had vanished. "Why are you showing me all this now?" he asked. Daniels met his eyes steadily. "Because Emily's grandparents, your in-laws, they were part of it. They weren't just wealthy clients. They were actively involved in covering up the discrimination. Their fortune was built on silencing people like Emily's father." John sat back, his mind reeling. "That's why they're pushing so hard for custody." "They're afraid," Daniels confirmed. "Afraid of what Emily might remember, what your wife might have told you. They want to control the narrative." "My wife," John's voice caught. "She never told me any of this. She was protecting you and Emily." Daniels gathered the documents carefully. "After her first husband died, she just wanted to move forward, find peace. When she met you, I think she saw a chance for a fresh start." John stared at his reflection in the coffee, seeing the exhaustion in his own eyes. "All this time, I thought they were just looking down on me for being poor, for working as a mechanic." "John," Daniels leaned forward, his voice urgent but gentle. "You're exactly what Emily needs. You're honest, hard-working, and you love her unconditionally. That's why I'm fighting so hard to help you keep her. It's what her father would have wanted, what your wife would have wanted." Something in Daniels's earnest tone, in the weight of guilt he carried, made John begin to trust him. He saw now that this man wasn't Emily's enemy. He was someone trying desperately to right an old wrong. "What's our next step?" John asked. Relief flooded Daniels's face. "We gather more evidence. I've been building this case for years. But with you and Emily involved now, we might finally have a chance to expose everything." They spent the next hour going through more files, Daniels explaining legal terms in plain language, John asking pointed questions. When they finally finished, John felt both overwhelmed and oddly hopeful. As they stepped out of the diner into the afternoon sun, John's newfound hope froze in his chest. Across the street, partially hidden behind a delivery truck, sat the black sedan. Its engine was running, exhaust visible in the cool air. "Samuel," John said quietly, not turning his head. 3:00. Daniels casually adjusted his tie, using the motion to glance in the indicated direction. His shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly. "Don't react," he murmured. "Act normal. I'll have someone look into the plate number." The doorbell rang just as John finished helping Emily with her math homework. Through the window, he could see Samuel Daniels standing on their worn front porch, arms loaded with brown paper bags. John hesitated for a moment before opening the door. "I hope I'm not intruding," Daniels said, shifting the bags in his arms. "I thought maybe you folks could use some dinner and—" He paused, looking slightly embarrassed. "I noticed Emily's backpack was pretty worn out." John's first instinct was to refuse, his pride stinging. But the smell of what had to be Italian food made his stomach growl, reminding him that their pantry was running low. Emily peeked around his legs, her eyes wide at the sight of the bags. "Come in," John said finally, stepping aside. "Emily, help Mr. Daniels with those bags." Emily approached cautiously, taking the lightest bag from Daniels. As she set it on their small kitchen table, a new purple backpack with sparkly butterflies fell out. Her eyes lit up, but she looked to her father first. "It's okay, sweetheart," John said softly. "You can look at it." While Emily explored her new backpack, Daniels began unpacking containers of pasta, garlic bread, and salad. The rich aroma of marinara sauce filled their modest kitchen, making it feel warmer somehow. "I remember your father loved Italian food," Daniels said to Emily, his voice gentle. "He used to say nobody made meatballs like his grandmother." Emily looked up from her backpack, curiosity replacing her usual shyness. "Really?" "Oh yes," Daniels chuckled, setting out paper plates John hadn't noticed him bring. "In fact, one time during our college years, he tried to recreate her recipe. Let's just say the fire department got involved." A tiny giggle escaped Emily's lips, surprising both men. John couldn't remember the last time he'd heard her laugh like that. "Did he burn the meatballs?" she asked, scooting her chair closer to the table. "Burn them? They were practically weapons." Daniels grinned, serving her a small portion of spaghetti. "The smoke alarm was screaming, and your father was running around the kitchen with a dish towel, trying to fan the smoke out the window. He looked like he was doing some crazy dance." Emily's giggles grew stronger, and John found himself smiling despite his earlier reservations. He watched as Daniels continued serving the food, noticing how careful he was to give Emily just the right amount of sauce, just like John always did. "Tell me more about my daddy," Emily said between bites of garlic bread. "Did he like butterflies too?" "Well," Daniels leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant with memory. "He loved all nature, actually. He used to carry this little notebook everywhere, sketching plants and insects he'd see. Once, he spent 3 hours following a monarch butterfly around campus, trying to get the perfect drawing." The kitchen filled with more stories as they ate. Daniels told them about the time Emily's father won a talent show by playing spoons, and how he once gave his own coat to a homeless man during a snowstorm. With each story, Emily's eyes grew brighter, and she edged her chair closer to Daniels. John noticed something changing in the room. The tension that had lived in their kitchen for so long was melting away, replaced by something warmer. Even the dim overhead light seemed brighter somehow. "Your daddy was the kind of person who always stood up for what was right," Daniels said softly, his voice growing serious for a moment. "Even when it was hard. Even when it cost him everything." He glanced at John, and an understanding passed between them. Emily helped clear the plates, something she usually had to be reminded to do. As they finished cleaning up, she pulled out her new backpack again, showing Daniels each pocket and zipper with growing excitement. "Look, it even has a special place for my pencils," she exclaimed, demonstrating how the side pocket worked. "And it's purple, your favorite color," Daniels smiled. "Your father loved purple too, said it was the color of royalty." "Really?" Emily hugged the backpack to her chest. "Daddy, can I show Mr. Daniels my purple crayon collection?" John nodded, watching as his daughter grabbed Daniels' hand without hesitation and led him to her small desk in the corner. The lawyer's expensive suit looked out of place next to Emily's second-hand furniture, but his genuine smile as she showed him her treasures belonged there perfectly. As the evening wound down, John noticed Emily fighting to keep her eyes open, though she clearly didn't want the stories to end. "Time for bed, sweetheart," he said gently. Emily's lower lip trembled slightly, but she nodded. Then, surprising everyone, she walked over to Daniels and wrapped her arms around his waist in a tight hug. "Thank you for telling me about my daddy," she whispered, her face pressed against his suit jacket. Then, even softer, she added, "Mommy says you're my daddy now." John felt his breath catch in his throat. Daniels stood frozen for a moment, his hand hovering uncertainly before gently patting Emily's back. The look on his face was a mixture of shock, grief, and something else. Hope, maybe. The morning sun cast long shadows through the tall windows of the Millbrook Public Library. John Carter followed Samuel Daniels past rows of wooden shelves, their footsteps echoing softly on the worn carpet. The musty smell of old newspapers and forgotten books filled the air. "Most of the local papers from that time period are stored down here," Daniels whispered, leading John down a narrow staircase to the basement archives. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, humming quietly. John rubbed his tired eyes. He'd barely slept last night, Emily's words from dinner still echoing in his mind. The way she'd hugged Daniels goodbye had stirred up complicated feelings he wasn't ready to face. "Here." Daniels pulled out a heavy box labeled 2015 to 2016. These should cover the months leading up to the accident. They settled at a scratched wooden table, carefully spreading out yellowed newspaper pages. John's hands trembled slightly as he handled the delicate papers. "Look at this," Daniels said, pointing to a small article. "The 15th of March, 2016. Local employee files discrimination complaint against Turner Manufacturing." He read aloud. "James Mitchell, Senior Quality Inspector, alleges systematic racial discrimination in hiring and promotion practices." John leaned closer. "That was Emily's father?" Daniels nodded grimly. James was one of the few black employees in management. He noticed they were passing over qualified minority candidates, pushing them into lower-paying positions. His voice grew quiet. "I should have backed him up. I saw the same things he did." They found more articles, spanning several months. The investigation, the company's denial, James's termination. John noticed how the stories grew smaller, moved further back in the paper until they disappeared entirely. "The company buried it," Daniels said, his jaw tight. "Used their influence with local media. James lost everything, his job, his reputation. But he wouldn't back down." John's fingers traced the edge of a photograph, showing James Mitchell standing proudly outside the factory gates. He had Emily's eyes, that same determined, set to his chin. Then 2 weeks later, Daniels pulled out another paper, dated April 30th. The headline made John's stomach clench. "Local man dies in highway accident." They read in silence. "Single car crash. Late at night. Brake failure. The article was brief, clinical. No mention of the discrimination case, the controversy. Just another tragic accident. Wait. John pointed to a quote from the investigating officer. Unusual wear pattern on brake lines suggests possible tampering. His voice cracked. But nothing came of it? Daniels shook his head, pulling out more papers. The official investigation concluded it was mechanical failure. But look at these maintenance records I found. He spread out several documents. James had his car serviced just days before. Everything checked out fine. John's hands clenched into fists. They got to the investigators too? Turner Manufacturing had deep pockets, powerful friends. Daniel's voice was heavy with old guilt. I tried looking into it afterward, but every lead went cold. Files disappeared. Witnesses changed their stories. They sat in silence, surrounded by the weight of past injustice. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry wasps. John picked up the photo of James again. Emily was only 3 when he died. But somehow, he thought of his daughter's accusation in the courtroom, the certainty in her young voice. Somehow she knew. Children sense things adults miss, Daniel said softly. Their hearts aren't clouded by doubt or fear. John looked up sharply. You've been investigating this all along, haven't you? That's why you took our case? Daniels nodded slowly. I've spent years gathering evidence, building connections, trying to make up for my silence. He met John's eyes. When I heard Emily was involved in a custody case, I had to help. I owe James that much. John stood up suddenly, needing to move. He paced between the shelves, mind racing. The black car watching his house. The custody battle with Emily's wealthy grandparents. It was all connected. John, Daniels's voice was urgent. There's something else you should see. He pulled out a final document, an internal memo from Turner Manufacturing, dated just days before James's death. The language was careful, corporate. But the threat was clear. James needed to be handled before his allegations gained traction. John sank back into his chair, the truth hitting him like a physical blow. He looked at Daniels, his voice barely a whisper. If what we're uncovering is true, then Emily was right. Someone did kill her daddy. The library basement felt colder somehow, the shadows deeper. Around them, the dusty archives held their secrets, waiting to be revealed. The Saturday morning sun streamed through the windows of Lincoln Elementary's gymnasium, highlighting the colorful decorations that adorned the walls. Paper hearts and construction paper chains hung from the ceiling, and a banner reading "Welcome to Father-Daughter Day" stretched across the stage. John Carter tugged at his clean but worn collar, feeling the stiffness of his freshly ironed shirt. He'd spent an hour that morning pressing out every wrinkle, determined to look his best. But standing among the crowd of fathers in their pressed suits and designer clothes, he felt painfully aware of his faded jeans and scuffed work boots. Emily bounced beside him, her second-hand dress freshly washed and her hair tied back with a ribbon they'd found at the dollar store. Her eyes sparkled with excitement as she took in the scene, tables laden with snacks, craft stations set up around the room, and dozens of fathers and daughters already mingling. "Look, Daddy, they have cookies." Emily tugged at his sleeve, pointing to a table decorated with pink frosted treats. "I see them, sweetheart." John managed a smile, though his stomach churned with anxiety. A group of businessmen fathers stood near the refreshment table, their daughters in matching designer dresses. One of them glanced at John's worn boots and quickly looked away. Miss Thompson, Emily's teacher, walked around the room with a clipboard, checking off names and greeting families. She wore a bright yellow dress and had a warm smile that made John feel a little less out of place. When she reached them, Emily gave her a big wave. "Emily, I'm so glad you could make it." Miss Thompson's genuine warmth eased some of John's tension. She checked her list. "And you must be Mr. Carter. Welcome." "Thank you, ma'am." John nodded, stuffing his hands in his pockets. The morning activities began with father-daughter crafts. John sat with Emily at a small table, helping her glue colorful paper hearts onto a picture frame. His large, work-roughened hands felt clumsy with the tiny scissors and glue stick, but Emily didn't seem to mind. "Daddy, you got glue on your finger?" she giggled, helping him wipe it off with a napkin. Around them, other fathers were creating perfect crafts, their manicured hands expertly assisting their daughters. John noticed one father using his phone to take a business call while his daughter worked alone on their project. The gym door opened, and John looked up to see Samuel Daniels walking in. He wore a casual sweater and slacks, dressed down from his usual suits, but still looking polished. John's heart sank. He hadn't expected Daniels to show up at a school event. Emily spotted him too. Her face lit up like a Christmas tree, and she waved enthusiastically. "Mr. Daniels, you came!" Daniels walked over to their table, smiling warmly. "I hope it's okay. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by." Before John could respond, Miss Thompson approached with her clipboard. "Oh, we have another visitor. Are you with the Carter family?" The question hung in the air for a moment. John felt his chest tighten as he watched Emily's reaction. She jumped up from her chair, ran to Daniels, and wrapped her arms around his waist in a tight hug. "This is my real daddy now," Emily announced, her voice carrying across the quiet gym. Several heads turned their way. John felt like he'd been punched in the gut. The words hit him harder than he expected, even though he'd seen Emily growing closer to Daniels over the past weeks. He gripped the edge of the table, trying to steady himself. Daniels looked equally shocked, his face flushing red. "Emily, sweetie," he started, but she kept talking. "He tells me stories about my first daddy, and he brings us groceries, and he helps me with my homework, just like a real daddy should." Emily's innocent words rang with pride and joy. Miss Thompson, sensing the delicate situation, quickly directed everyone's attention to the next activity. "All right, families, time for our father-daughter dance." The gym filled with music, a sweet, slow song about fathers and daughters. John watched from his chair as other pairs moved to the dance floor. Emily still held on to Daniel's hand, looking up at him with complete trust and adoration. "May I have this dance?" Daniels asked Emily formally, but his eyes met John's, seeking permission. John managed a small nod, his throat too tight to speak. He watched as Daniels led Emily to the dance floor, lifting her tiny feet onto his shoes so they could move together to the music. Emily's laughter carried across the room as Daniels twirled her around. From his spot against the wall, John felt the familiar weight of inadequacy pressing down on his shoulders. He'd worked so hard to be everything Emily needed: father, mother, provider, protector. Yet here was Daniels, offering her things John could never give. Stories about her biological father, financial security, a connection to her past. But as he watched them dance, something else stirred in his heart. Emily's face glowed with pure joy. Her eyes sparkled with a light he hadn't seen since before her mother died. Despite the pain in his chest, John couldn't deny that Daniels had brought something precious back into Emily's life. Other fathers and daughters swirled around the dance floor, but John remained rooted to his spot by the wall. A complex mix of emotions washed over him. Jealousy at the easy way Emily had claimed Daniels as her real daddy, gratitude for the happiness Daniels brought to her life, and a deep, aching love for his little girl who just wanted to feel complete. Emily caught his eye across the room and waved, her smile bright enough to light up the darkest night. John waved back, forcing his lips into a smile despite the tears threatening to spill. He loved her enough to share her, he realized, even if it meant sometimes watching from the sidelines while another man helped fill the gaps in her heart. The music continued to play, and John Carter stood quietly against the wall, his heart torn between the sharp sting of jealousy and the warm glow of gratitude, watching his daughter dance with the man she had chosen to call her real daddy now. John's fingers trembled as he pulled the crisp white envelope from his rusty mailbox. The morning sun cast long shadows across his small front yard, where dandelions pushed through cracks in the concrete path. His work shirt was already stained with motor oil from his early morning shift at the garage. The letter was typed on expensive letterhead. As his eyes scanned the words, his stomach twisted into knots. Investigation reveals prominent lawyer Samuel Daniels suspected of embezzling $500,000 from Minority Community Justice Fund. John sank onto the front steps, the concrete cold through his worn jeans. He read the letter 3 more times, each word hitting him like a physical blow. This couldn't be right. Daniels had been helping them, showing up with groceries, telling Emily stories about her real father. He'd seemed so genuine. Inside the house, he heard Emily humming as she got ready for school. The sound made his chest ache. She'd just started to trust Daniels, to look at him with those big, hopeful eyes. The morning paper arrived with a thud on his driveway. John didn't need to read the headline to know the story would be everywhere by noon. In a small town like theirs, news this big spread like wildfire. At work, the whispers followed him. Customers who usually chatted while he fixed their cars suddenly fell silent when he approached. During his lunch break, he overheard 2 women at the diner counter. "Did you hear about that lawyer? The one with the Carter custody case? Shameful. Taking money meant for poor families. And he had everyone fooled, acting all righteous." John kept his head down, focusing on his sandwich that tasted like cardboard in his mouth. His phone buzzed, a text from Grace's parents' lawyer. They wanted to move up the next custody hearing. Of course they did. This was exactly what they needed to prove John was an unfit father, trusting his daughter with a criminal. By afternoon, the local news station van was parked outside the courthouse. John watched the reporter on TV during his break, her perfectly styled hair gleaming as she detailed the allegations. Bank records showing suspicious transfers, missing documentation, a paper trail leading straight to Daniels. "Daddy?" Emily's voice startled him as he picked her up from school. "Why is everyone talking about Mr. Daniels?" "Tommy said his mom says he's a bad man." John's throat tightened. "Sometimes grown-up things are complicated, sweetheart." He helped her buckle her seatbelt, buying time. "We don't always know the whole story." "But he's not bad," Emily insisted. "He tells the best stories. And he brought me that pretty notebook for school." Before John could respond, his phone rang. Daniel's number flashed on the screen. John let it go to voicemail. They were halfway home when Daniels pulled up beside them in his silver BMW. John instinctively moved Emily to his other side. "John, please." Daniels stepped out of his car, his usually pristine suit wrinkled, his tie loose. "I need to explain. This is a setup. Someone's trying to destroy everything I've built. The bank records," John started, "can be faked." Daniels ran a hand through his graying hair. "Think about it. Why would I steal from the very fund I created? I've spent years trying to make up for my past mistakes, trying to help families like yours." Emily tugged at John's sleeve. "Daddy, Mr. Daniels looks sad. I know who's behind this," Daniels continued, his voice dropping. "The same people who were involved in your wife's first husband's death. They're scared of what we might uncover." A police car cruised by slowly, the officer watching them with interest. John felt exposed, standing there on the sidewalk, caught between his instinct to protect Emily and the nagging feeling that Daniels might be telling the truth. "I can't do this right now," John said finally. "Emily needs her dinner, and I've got work to finish." "John, just give me time to think." At home, John went through the motions of their evening routine. He helped Emily with her math homework, made mac and cheese for dinner, ran her bath. But his mind kept circling back to Daniels, to the evidence, to everything they'd discovered about Emily's father's death. The phone rang again. Grace's parents this time. John let it go to voicemail. He already knew what they'd say. That they'd been right all along. That Emily deserved better than a poor mechanic who couldn't even recognize a criminal when he saw one. After tucking Emily in, John grabbed an old quilt and settled onto the front porch. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of Mrs. Henderson's flowering cherry tree next door. A few houses down, he could see the glow of TV screens through windows, probably all tuned to the news about Daniels. The worn porch boards creaked under his rocking chair. John stared into the darkness, his mind replaying every conversation with Daniels, every piece of evidence they'd uncovered about Emily's father's death. Had it all been manipulation? Or was Daniels telling the truth about being framed? The sound of a car door slamming made him tense, but it was just the neighbors. Inside, Emily's nightlight cast a soft glow through her window. John thought about her face lighting up when she saw Daniels at the Father-Daughter Day event, how she'd run to him without hesitation. "Did I trust the wrong man?" he whispered to himself, his words disappearing into the quiet night. The evening air hung heavy with late summer humidity as Samuel Daniels' polished shoes crunched up the gravel path to John's front door. His usually pristine suit was wrinkled, his tie loose around his neck. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, telling of sleepless nights since the accusations broke. Emily sat on the porch swing, her small legs dangling. When she spotted Daniels approaching, she quickly slipped inside the house, letting the screen door bang shut behind her. The sound made Daniels flinch. Through the window he could see Mrs. Henderson from next door, watching while pretending to water her wilting petunias. Her lips moved rapidly as she spoke into her phone. The whole town was buzzing with the scandal. Daniels raised his hand to knock, but John opened the door first. He stood in the doorway, his broad shoulders blocking the entrance, work-calloused hands gripping the doorframe. "John, please," Daniels said, his voice hoarse. "Let me explain." "Explain what?" John's voice was quiet but sharp. "How you supposedly stole money meant for families like mine. Money that was supposed to help people who can barely keep food on the table? It's not true." Daniels pulled a handkerchief from his pocket, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Someone's trying to frame me. The numbers don't add up. If you'll just look at these documents." He reached for his briefcase. "No more documents." John's eyes were red-rimmed from lack of sleep. "No more legal talk. Emily won't even look at you anymore. She heard Mrs. Henderson telling everyone you're a crook who pretends to help poor folks while stealing their money." Through the screen door, Emily peeked out from behind the worn curtains. Her small face showed confusion and hurt, before disappearing back into the shadows of the house. "Emily." Daniel's voice cracked. He took a step forward, but John didn't move. "You know me now, John. You know I would never—" "Do I?" John's shoulders slumped. "I thought I knew you were the man who let Emily's real father down, who stood by while he lost everything. At least you were honest about that. But now?" He shook his head. "I don't know what to believe anymore." Mrs. Henderson had abandoned all pretense of watering her flowers. She stood at her fence, phone still pressed to her ear, watching the scene unfold. "The custody hearing is in 3 days," John continued. "Emily's grandparents are using this against us. Their lawyer called this morning, said it shows what kind of people I let near my daughter." His voice caught. "They might be right." Daniel's face went pale. "John, please. Everything I've done, all the work with the community fund, it was to make things right, to help families like yours get justice." "Justice?" John's laugh was bitter. "Look around, Daniels. Look at my broken-down house. My daughter wearing hand-me-downs. Me working 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. Where's the justice in that?" A car drove by slowly, its passengers clearly rubbernecking at the scene on the porch. John's jaw tightened. "I wanted to believe in you," John said. "Emily was starting to love you. Do you know what that means? Do you know how hard it is for her to trust after losing her real father? After losing her mother?" Daniel's shoulders sagged. He looked older suddenly, defeated. "I never meant to hurt either of you." "But you did." John's voice was firm now. "Until you clear your name, if you can clear your name, I need you to stay away from us." From Emily. "John, I mean it." John's hands clenched into fists. "I can't risk losing her. She's all I have." Behind John, Emily had crept closer to the screen door again. Her small hand pressed against the mesh, leaving a tiny imprint. For a moment, her eyes met Daniel's, and he saw tears streaming down her cheeks. Daniels reached out instinctively, but Emily darted away from the door. The sound of her footsteps echoed through the small house as she ran to her room. "You should go," John said quietly. Daniels stood there for a long moment, his briefcase heavy in his hand. Finally, he nodded once and turned away. His steps were slow as he walked back down the gravel path, past Mrs. Henderson's judgmental stare, past the curious onlookers in their cars. John watched until Daniel's expensive car disappeared around the corner. Then, he closed the door, his legs giving out beneath him as he slid to the floor. The weight of everything, the custody battle, the betrayal, the fear of losing Emily, crashed over him like a wave. Soft footsteps padded across the worn carpet. Emily appeared, her face tear-stained, her favorite stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest. Without a word, she wrapped her small arms around her father's neck. "Daddy," she whispered, "please don't cry." John sat at his kitchen table late that night, surrounded by newspaper clippings and photocopied documents. His worn mechanic's uniform still smelled of motor oil from his evening shift. Empty coffee cups littered the table, testament to his determination to stay awake. Emily's words from earlier haunted him. Please don't cry. He couldn't let her see him break down again. She needed him to be strong. The local paper's headline glared up at him, "Prominent lawyer accused of embezzlement." Below it, Daniel's photo looked back at him, the man's usually confident expression replaced by one of shock and defeat. John rubbed his tired eyes and reached for another document. This one was from the Community Justice Fund's records, which he'd gotten from the courthouse archives that afternoon. Something about the numbers didn't add up. The phone rang, startling him. At this hour? He grabbed it before it could wake Emily. "Mr. Carter?" A woman's voice, unfamiliar and nervous. I work at the corporate office. I can't tell you my name, but I saw what they're doing to Mr. Daniels. It isn't right." John's heart raced. "What do you mean?" "Check the transfer records from March 15th. The numbers were altered. I saw Mr. Richardson do it himself." The line went dead before John could respond. Richardson. The name hit him like a punch to the gut. James Richardson was the executive who'd forced Emily's biological father out of the company years ago. John's hands shook as he dug through the papers, finding the March records. There it was, a series of transfers that looked perfect at first glance. Too perfect. He grabbed his late wife's old journals, flipping through them frantically. There, an entry from 5 years ago. "James Richardson threatened Tom again today. Said he'd destroy anyone who tried to expose the discrimination. Tom won't back down, but I'm scared." The pieces started falling into place. Richardson had silenced Tom, Emily's biological father, when he tried to expose the company's racist practices. Now he was using the same tactics against Daniels, who'd been fighting for justice in Tom's memory. John spread everything across the table. Bank statements, newspaper articles, court documents. Patterns emerged. Small discrepancies in dates. Signatures that didn't quite match. Someone had gone to great lengths to frame Daniels, but they'd left traces. A floorboard creaked behind him. John turned to find Emily in her pajamas, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "Daddy, are you still working?" "Hey, sweetheart." He opened his arms and she climbed into his lap. "I'm trying to help Mr. Daniels." Emily touched one of the newspaper photos. "The ladies at school say he's a bad man now, but..." Her lower lip trembled. "He told me stories about my first daddy. Nice stories. Was he lying?" John hugged her close. "No, honey. I don't think he was lying. I think someone's trying to hurt him, just like they hurt your first daddy. Can we help him?" John looked at the evidence spread before him. The custody hearing was in 2 days. If he spoke up, testified about what he'd found, it could help clear Daniel's name. But Richardson was powerful. Fighting him could cost John everything, maybe even Emily. "It's complicated, sweetie." He stroked her hair. "Sometimes doing the right thing is scary." Emily's small fingers traced the words on the newspaper. "Mommy used to say being brave means doing the right thing, even when you're scared." John's chest tightened. His late wife's words, coming from their daughter's mouth, hit home. She was right. He couldn't stay silent, not when he knew the truth. That would make him no better than Daniels had been years ago when he'd failed to stand up for Tom. "Mr. Daniels tried to help us," Emily continued, yawning. "Even when everyone said mean things about him being at our house." John nodded slowly. The memory of Daniels bringing school supplies, sharing meals with them, making Emily laugh, it all meant something. The man had been trying to make amends, to do better than he had in the past. Dawn was breaking when John finally made his decision. He called the courthouse and left a message requesting to testify at Daniel's hearing. Then he called his boss at the garage, asking for the day off. His hands shook as he dialed one more number. Daniel's office. "Samuel Daniels," came the tired voice. "It's John Carter. I found something you need to see." "About Richardson," a sharp intake of breath. "John, be careful. Richardson is dangerous. I know." John cut him off. "That's why I'm testifying. Someone needs to stand up to him. Someone needs to tell the truth." Silence stretched between them. Finally, Daniel spoke, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, John. But the custody hearing is the day after tomorrow." "I know." John watched the sunrise through his kitchen window, golden light spilling across the scattered papers. "Some things are worth the risk." Emily appeared again, ready for school in her faded dress. She looked at the phone in John's hand, then at his face. Without a word, she hugged him tight. John held his daughter close with one arm, the phone with his other hand. "I'll see you in court, Mr. Daniels. And this time, we're both going to do the right thing." He hung up and took a deep breath. The path ahead was clear, even if it was frightening. He would stand up, speak out, protect both his daughter and the truth, just like Tom had done, just like his wife would have wanted. Emily tugged his hand. "Time for school, Daddy." "Yes, sweetheart." He gathered the evidence into a folder, tucking it safely away. Time to be brave. The morning sun streamed through the window, casting long shadows across the kitchen floor. John Carter straightened his shoulders and faced the new day, ready to risk everything for justice. The old courthouse buzzed with tension. Every wooden bench creaked under the weight of spectators packed shoulder to shoulder. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the worn floor. John Carter sat in the front row, his work-roughened hands clasped tightly in his lap. Emily nestled against him, her small fingers wrapped around his arm. Mr. Daniels stood at the defense table, his usually pristine suit looking rumpled after weeks of stress. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, but he held his head high. At the prosecution's table, two sharp-dressed lawyers shuffled papers with confident smirks. In the back row, Richard Maxwell, the corporate executive, lounged with an air of superiority. His expensive suit and gold watch gleamed in the morning light. He whispered to his associates, occasionally letting out a quiet chuckle. Judge Harrison's gavel cracked through the murmurs. "This court will come to order." The prosecutor rose, adjusting his tie. "Your Honor, the evidence clearly shows that Mr. Daniels embezzled over $200,000 from the Minority Justice Fund. Bank records don't lie." John's heart pounded as he watched Daniels shake his head slightly. The prosecutor continued presenting evidence, spreadsheets, bank statements, and witness testimonies that painted Daniels as a fraud. Each piece seemed to tighten the noose around his neck. "The defense may present its case," Judge Harrison announced. Daniels' lawyer stood, but John couldn't wait any longer. "Your Honor," he called out, rising to his feet, "I have evidence that needs to be heard." The judge peered over his glasses. "Mr. Carter, this is highly irregular. You're not a party to this case. Please, Your Honor." John's voice shook but grew stronger. "What I have to say directly relates to Mr. Daniels' innocence." Emily squeezed his hand tighter as whispers rippled through the courtroom. Maxwell shifted in his seat, his smug expression flickering for just a moment. After a long pause, Judge Harrison nodded. "Very well, Mr. Carter, step forward and be sworn in." John walked to the witness stand, his work boots echoing on the hardwood floor. After taking the oath, he pulled a thick manila envelope from his jacket. "Your Honor, these documents show that Mr. Daniels was framed." John's voice carried clearly through the hushed courtroom. "The same man who destroyed Emily's biological father's career years ago is behind this too." He opened the envelope with trembling fingers. "These are internal memos from Maxwell Industries, showing how they created false bank records and planted them in the fund's accounts." The prosecutor jumped to his feet. "Objection? These documents weren't properly submitted as evidence." "Overruled," Judge Harrison said firmly. "Continue, Mr. Carter." John held up a stack of papers. These memos detail how Mr. Maxwell ordered his IT department to hack into the fund's computer system. They planted false transactions and backdated them to match their story. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Maxwell's face had turned an angry red. "There's more," John continued. "I found old security footage from the night they claimed Mr. Daniels accessed the fund's computers. It shows Maxwell's people breaking into the office instead." The judge leaned forward. "How did you obtain these documents, Mr. Carter?" "I'm a mechanic, Your Honor. I work late shifts at the garage next to Maxwell Industries. Last week, I saw them loading boxes into a truck at midnight. They dropped some papers, and when I went to pick them up..." John's voice grew quiet. "I saw what they were trying to hide." He pulled out more papers. "These show that Maxwell targeted Mr. Daniels because he was investigating discrimination at Maxwell Industries. The same kind of discrimination that got Emily's real father fired years ago." The courtroom erupted in shocked murmurs. Judge Harrison banged his gavel for order. In the back of the courtroom, Maxwell stood abruptly. Two security officers moved to block the exits. "There's one more thing," John said, his voice growing stronger. "These documents suggest Maxwell was behind the brake failure that killed Emily's biological father. It wasn't an accident after all." The courtroom exploded in chaos. Maxwell lunged for the door, but was quickly detained by court officers. Judge Harrison's gavel cracked like thunder. "Order! Order in this court!" The judge's voice boomed over the commotion. Daniel sat at the defense table, tears streaming down his face. Years of guilt and pain seemed to wash away as the truth finally came to light. Emily had slipped from her seat and run to John. She grabbed his hand tight, watching wide-eyed as Maxwell was handcuffed and led away, his face twisted with rage. "Based on this new evidence," Judge Harrison declared, "I am dismissing all charges against Mr. Daniels. Furthermore, I am ordering an immediate investigation into Richard Maxwell and Maxwell Industries." The judge turned to John. "Mr. Carter, this court thanks you for your courage in bringing forth this evidence. You've done a great service to justice today." John felt Emily's small hand squeeze his harder. He looked down at his daughter's bright eyes, seeing in them a mix of pride and love that made his heart swell. In that moment, the years of struggle, the long nights of worry, and all the pain seemed worth it. The truth had finally come to light, and with it, a chance for healing could begin. Daniels approached them, his eyes red, but his face filled with gratitude. Emily looked up at both men, her two fathers, and the love in her expression said more than words ever could. The kitchen was quiet except for the gentle clink of forks against plates. Through the small window above the sink, the last rays of sunset painted the cramped room in soft orange light. John Carter watched as Emily pushed her peas around her plate, making little roads between her mashed potatoes. Mr. Daniels sat across from them, his tie loosened and suit jacket draped over the back of his chair. The events of the day had left them all drained. The courtroom drama, the exposed truth, the justice finally served. It felt like they'd lived through a lifetime in just a few hours. John had ordered pizza to celebrate, something they rarely could afford, but tonight was special. "Daddy," Emily said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Can I have more sauce?" John reached for the small plastic container of garlic sauce, but Daniels was quicker. Their hands met briefly over the table, and they shared a quiet look of understanding. "Here you go, sweetheart," Daniels said, passing it to Emily. His voice was still hoarse from the emotional testimony earlier. Emily carefully drizzled the sauce over her pizza slice, her tongue poking out in concentration. "Mr. Daniels, you didn't eat all your crust." "You caught me," Daniels chuckled, pushing his plate toward her. "Would you like it?" Emily's face lit up. She grabbed the abandoned crust and dunked it in sauce, giggling when some dripped onto her chin. John reached over with a napkin, but Daniels was already there, gently wiping her face. "You know," Emily said between bites, "I prayed really hard for you, Mr. Daniels, every night." The lawyer's hands trembled slightly as he folded the napkin. "You did?" "Uh-huh." Emily nodded solemnly. "I asked Jesus to help people see the truth, because I remembered what Mommy used to say about listening to your heart." John's throat tightened. Grace had always told Emily that, to trust her heart. because God spoke through it. He watched as Emily slid off her chair and walked around the table to where Daniel Saturday. Without hesitation, she climbed into his lap, her small arms wrapping around his neck. "I knew you didn't do it," she whispered. "My heart told me so." Daniels held her close, his eyes meeting John's over her head. There were tears there, and something else. A desperate need for acceptance, for forgiveness, for family. John felt the last of his walls crumble. He'd been holding on to them so tightly, trying to protect Emily, trying to be everything she needed. But watching them now, he realized something profound. Love wasn't meant to be contained or controlled. It grew wild and free, creating connections where none existed before. "Thank you, Emily," Daniels whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Your prayers meant everything." Emily pulled back, her small hands framing Daniel's face. "Does this mean you'll stay? For always?" John cleared his throat. "Emily, honey, Mr. Daniels has his own home." "But we need him," Emily interrupted, with that startling clarity children sometimes possess. "Don't we, Daddy? He makes us happy." The simple truth of her words hung in the air. John looked around their modest kitchen, at the chipped plates, the mismatched chairs, the crayon drawings pinned to the refrigerator. It wasn't much, but it was home. And somehow, without him noticing, Daniels had become part of it. "Yes," John said softly. "We do need him." Daniel's eyes widened, hope dawning on his tired face. "John, you're family now," John said firmly. "If you want to be." Emily bounced in Daniel's lap, clapping her hands. "Family, like in my prayers." "I'd be honored," Daniels managed, holding Emily close with one arm while extending his other hand to John across the table. John took it, feeling the strength in that grip, the promise of support and friendship and shared love for this precious little girl who had brought them together. Emily yawned suddenly, reminding them of the late hour. "Can we say prayers together? Like a real family?" John looked at Daniels, who nodded. They pushed back their chairs and joined hands, forming a small circle in the humble kitchen. Emily's small fingers linked them together, her daddy on one side, her new father figure on the other. "Dear Jesus," Emily began, her voice sweet and clear in the quiet room. The men bowed their heads, drawn into the innocent faith of a child who had never stopped believing in miracles. Morning sunlight streamed through the tall courthouse windows, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floors. John Carter tugged at his worn tie, the same one he'd worn to every hearing. It was the only one he owned. Emily sat beside him in her best dress, a hand-me-down from a neighbor, but freshly pressed and adorned with a bright yellow ribbon in her hair. The grandparents' side of the courtroom buzzed with expensive suits and whispered consultations. Their lawyer, Mr. Harrison, arranged papers with manicured hands, occasionally shooting superior glances toward John's table. "All rise," the bailiff called out. "The Honorable Judge Margaret Wilson presiding." Everyone stood as Judge Wilson entered, her gray hair pulled back severely, reading glasses perched on her nose. She settled into her chair and surveyed the room before speaking. "We're here to conclude the custody hearing for Emily Carter. I understand both parties wish to make final statements." Mr. Harrison rose first, his leather shoes gleaming. "Your Honor, my clients, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, can provide Emily with every advantage: private schooling, music lessons, summer camps. They have a trust fund established for her college education. Their home has 5 bedrooms, a swimming pool, and—" "Thank you, Mr. Harrison," the judge interrupted. "Mr. Carter, would you like to speak?" John stood slowly, his hands trembling slightly. Emily reached up and squeezed his fingers, giving him strength. He cleared his throat and looked directly at the judge. "Your Honor, I know I'm not rich," he began, his voice quiet but steady. "My house needs repairs. Emily's clothes aren't always new. Sometimes dinner is just peanut butter sandwiches." He paused, swallowing hard. "But every night, I read to her before bed, even when I'm bone, tired from working 2 jobs. I know every one of her drawings by heart. They're all over our fridge. When she has nightmares, she knows she can crawl into my bed, and I'll hold her until she feels safe again." The courtroom was silent now, hanging on his words. Even the grandparents had stopped whispering. "I might not be able to give her everything money can buy," John continued, "but I give her every piece of my heart. She knows she's loved, not just by what I say, but by how I live every day for her." His voice cracked slightly. "She's all I have, Your Honor. She's my whole world." Emily's small hand tightened around his, and tears glistened in her eyes. "I love you, Daddy," she whispered, loud enough for nearby seats to hear. Mr. Daniels stood then, straightening his tie. "Your Honor, if I may address the court." The judge nodded, and Daniels moved to the center of the room. Gone was any trace of the man who'd faced accusations weeks before. He stood tall, confident, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "I've had the privilege of watching John Carter these past months," Daniels began. "I've seen him skip meals so Emily could have seconds. I've watched him work until midnight at the garage, then get up at dawn to make her breakfast. When her shoes wore out, he fixed them 3 times before finally buying new ones, with money he earned doing extra oil changes on Sundays." Daniels turned to face the grandparents. "The Thompsons speak of advantages and opportunities, but I submit that the greatest advantage any child can have is a parent who demonstrates unconditional love, integrity, and sacrifice. John Carter isn't just Emily's father, he's her hero, her safe harbor, her moral compass." From his briefcase, Daniels pulled out a stack of papers. "I have here letters from Emily's teachers, their neighbors, even the local grocery store owner. They all tell the same story, of a father who puts his daughter first, always. Of a man who, despite hardship, has created a home filled with laughter and love." He handed the letters to the judge, who began reading them carefully. "Your Honor, the law asks us to consider the best interests of the child. I argue that separating Emily from the father who has raised her with such devotion would cause irreparable harm to her emotional well-being." The judge looked up from the letters, studying Emily's face. "Emily, would you like to say anything?" Emily stood, smoothing her dress with small hands. "I want to stay with my daddy," she said simply. "He makes me feel safe and happy, and he needs me too." Judge Wilson removed her glasses, considering everyone in the courtroom. The silence stretched taut as a wire. Finally, she spoke. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, your financial resources are impressive, but a child needs more than material comfort. She needs stability, consistency, and most importantly, love." She turned to John. "Mr. Carter, while your means are modest, your dedication to Emily is extraordinary. The court finds that Emily's best interests are served by remaining in your custody." Relief flooded John's face as Emily threw her arms around his neck. Across the room, the Thompsons stood quietly, gathering their belongings. "Mrs." Thompson paused at the door, looking back at her granddaughter with tears in her eyes, then followed her husband out. The Sunday morning dawned clear and bright, with golden rays warming the crisp autumn air. Outside the small white church on Pine Street, fallen leaves crunched beneath their feet as John Carter guided Emily up the weathered steps, Samuel Daniels following close behind. Emily's pink dress, freshly pressed the night before, swished around her knees as she skipped between the 2 men. The wooden doors creaked open, revealing the familiar faces of their church family. Mrs. Peterson, the choir director, beamed at them from her position near the piano. "Emily, sweetheart, we saved seats right up front for you all." John felt a moment of uncertainty as heads turned their way. After everything that had happened, the custody battle, the accusations, the truth finally coming to light, he wasn't sure how the congregation would receive them. But warm smiles greeted them from every pew. Pastor Robert stepped down from the pulpit, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners as he extended his hand first to John, then to Daniels. "It's wonderful to see you here today," he said, his voice carrying the gentle authority that had guided his flock for over 2 decades. They settled into the polished wooden pew, Emily nestled between them. The familiar scent of old hymnals and lemon furniture polish wrapped around them like a comfortable blanket. As the organ began to play the opening hymn, Emily's clear voice rose sweet and pure above the congregation. John watched his daughter, his heart so full it ached. She looked different today, lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted from her small shoulders. The shadows that had lurked in her eyes since her mother's passing seemed to have faded. During a quiet moment in the service, while the congregation bowed their heads in prayer, John found his thoughts drifting to Emily's biological father. He'd never met the man, but through Daniel's stories and the truth they'd uncovered, John felt like he knew him now. His courage, his integrity, his love for justice. The kind of father who would have moved mountains for his little girl. Beside him, Daniel sat with his head bowed, his usually confident posture softened in reverence. The morning light streaming through the stained glass windows painted patterns across his face, and John could see the slight tremor in his clasped hands, hands that had once failed Emily's father but now worked tirelessly to protect his daughter. When it came time for the children's message, Emily joined the other kids at the front of the church. Pastor Roberts spoke about families, about how God's love can create bonds stronger than blood. Emily sat cross-legged on the carpet, nodding seriously, as if each word was meant especially for her. Sometimes, Pastor Roberts said, meeting John's eyes with understanding, God gives us exactly the family we need, even if it doesn't look like what we expected. After the service, the congregation gathered in the fellowship hall for coffee and donuts. Emily clutched a chocolate-frosted treat, careful not to drop crumbs on her dress. Church members stopped by their table, offering words of support and welcome to Daniels, treating him not as an outsider but as part of their extended family. Mrs. Wilson, who had taught Sunday school for 30 years, placed her wrinkled hand on Emily's shoulder. "Your mama would be so proud of you, child," she said softly. "She always said you had the biggest heart of anyone she knew." John watched as Emily's eyes welled up with tears, but they weren't sad tears. She reached for both his and Daniel's hands, her small fingers sticky with chocolate frosting. "I know," she said. "Mommy told me that love grows bigger when you share it. That's why I have 2 daddies now. The one in heaven and the one here." She squeezed their hands tightly. The simple truth in her words struck John like a physical force. He looked across at Daniels and saw his own emotions reflected in the lawyer's face. Gratitude, humility, and a fierce love for this remarkable little girl who had brought them together. Daniels cleared his throat, trying to find his voice. "Emily," he said carefully, "your first daddy was one of the bravest men I ever knew. He taught me what it means to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. I promise you, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of being your second daddy." John felt Emily lean against his side, her warmth seeping through his Sunday suit. She still held both their hands, creating a circle of connection that felt sacred in its simplicity. Through all the pain and loss, through the struggles and fears, they had found their way here, to this moment of pure grace. The morning light continued to stream through the church windows, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. Around them, the sounds of fellowship and community filled the hall. Children laughing, coffee cups clinking, the murmur of conversations and shared prayers. Emily took another bite of her donut, leaving a smudge of chocolate on her chin that John gently wiped away with a napkin. "You know what else Mommy used to say?" Emily asked, looking between her 2 fathers. "She said that angels are God's way of making sure we're never alone." She paused, considering her words carefully as only a child can. "I think she sent me both of you. My daddy in heaven watches over us, and you 2 take care of me down here." The evening sun painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink as John, Emily, and Daniels made their way down Main Street. The church service had filled their hearts with a warmth that lingered, even as the autumn air grew cooler. Shop windows glowed with early evening lights, and the familiar sounds of their small town surrounded them, screen doors clicking shut, wind chimes tinkling in the breeze, and distant children's laughter. Emily dashed ahead, her patent leather shoes clicking against the sidewalk. She twirled, her pink dress floating around her like a flower in bloom. "Look at me, Daddy," she called out, spinning until she got dizzy. John watched her with a smile that reached deep into his tired eyes. "Careful there, sweetheart," Daniels called out, his voice carrying the same gentle concern that John felt. It was strange how natural it felt now, sharing these moments of parenthood. Mrs. Miller waved from her porch as they passed, her usual scrutiny replaced with a genuine smile. "Beautiful service today," she called out. John touched the brim of his hat in response, remembering how just weeks ago the same woman had whispered behind her hand about their family troubles. "Things sure have changed," John murmured, more to himself than anyone else. Daniels nodded, matching John's pace. "They have, but some changes are for the better." He was wearing his Sunday best, but his tie had been loosened, and his sleeves were rolled up, looking more like a regular person than the polished lawyer who had first entered their lives. The hardware store owner, Mr. Thompson, paused while locking up his shop to give them a respectful nod. "Evening, John," Mr. Daniels. The gesture wasn't lost on either man. It was acceptance, plain and simple. Emily discovered a pile of leaves on someone's lawn and couldn't resist kicking through them, sending red and gold fragments spinning into the air. Her giggles echoed down the street, drawing smiles from passing neighbors. "Did you see that?" she called back to both men. "The leaves danced? Just like you in church today," Daniels replied, making her beam with pride. John watched his daughter's joy and felt something settle in his chest. A peace he hadn't known since before his wife's passing. The constant worry that had been his companion for so long seemed to have lifted, like morning fog burning away in sunshine. They passed the diner where John and Daniels had first begun to trust each other, its neon sign humming in the growing dusk. Through the window, they could see Sally, the waitress, giving them a friendly wave. Emily waved back enthusiastically, nearly losing her balance in her excitement. "Remember to watch where you're going, Princess," John called out, but his voice held no real worry. The evening felt too perfect for concern. The streetlights began clicking on one by one, casting pools of warm light on the sidewalk. Moths danced in the beams, and crickets had started their evening chorus. The air smelled of wood smoke from someone's fireplace, mixing with the sweet scent of late-blooming flowers from Mrs. Henderson's garden. "The stars are coming out," Emily announced, pointing upward at the first twinkling lights in the darkening sky. She slowed her pace, falling back toward the two men. Daniels looked up, his face softening. "You know, your father, your first father, he used to love stargazing. He taught me all the constellations when we were young." Instead of sadness, Emily's face lit up with interest. "Really? Can you teach me too?" "I'd be honored," Daniels replied, his voice thick with emotion. John watched the exchange, feeling grateful rather than jealous. There was room in Emily's heart for all these memories, all this love. Just as there was room in their lives for Daniels. As they approached the final block toward home, Emily reached back, her small hands seeking both men's larger ones. Without hesitation, they each took a hand, and she swung between them, humming a hymn from the morning service. Under the glow of the streetlights, their shadows stretched long behind them. 3 figures merged into one. The sight made John's throat tighten with emotion. This was what healing looked like. This was what hope felt like. They walked the final stretch in comfortable silence, their footsteps in perfect rhythm. Neighbors' porch lights winked at them like friendly eyes, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled the hour. Emily's hand was warm in John's, and on her other side, Daniels walked tall and sure, every bit as much a part of their family as if he'd always been there. The simple act of walking home together, thought John, could be the most profound prayer of thanksgiving. Each step was a blessing, each shared smile, a small miracle. After all the storms they'd weathered, this peaceful evening felt like God's own answer to their prayers. Emily squeezed both their hands and smiled up at each of them in turn, her face glowing with pure joy. In that moment, under the warm light of the street lamps, they were more than just 3 people walking home. They were a family, bound together by something stronger than blood. Love, forgiveness, and grace. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of John Carter, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.